As mentioned earlier, Governor J.B. Pritzker has lifted the state's mask mandate for fully vaccinated residents. This comes after the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention eased its own mask-wearing guidelines. But whether it's trauma from living through a pandemic or being immunocompromised, not everyone is ready to unmask just yet. Joining us to discuss the future of masks is Jocelyn Carter, Director of Clinical Training and Associate Professor of Clinical Psychology with DePaul University. Jocelyn, thank you for joining us. What are you hearing from folks in terms of the trauma that they've experienced from the pandemic?
Right. What I've been hearing from folks in terms of the trauma they've been experiencing is that there's really a wide range. Some people have been on the front lines in terms of healthcare settings and essential workers and witnessed people die, have witnessed people be very, very sick and had to make decisions about how to help them. Others have lost people in their lives. And so there's a wide range of experiences that people have had that would be considered stressors or stressful, but there's a ton of variability in terms of how severe or traumatic people's lives have been like since the pandemic started.
How would you say that trauma in particular has impacted Black and Latino communities where we know the rates of infection and death have been higher?
Right. Well, in Black and Latino communities, one of the things that we've been learning about as the pandemic has progressed is that we have layered the COVID-19 pandemic on top of a ton of other pre-existing traumatic events. And these don't just get added, they get amplified. So when you're already vulnerable because of systemic racism, and then there's another traumatic event that occurs that sort of amplifies because our bodies aren't able to recover. And so when individuals in these communities are faced with differential exposure to environments that put them at risk for COVID, so for example, having an hourly job instead of a salary job, really not being able to stay home, that takes a toll, especially when the conversation has been maybe about people not wanting to get vaccinated or not wanting to do things to keep them healthy, when really it's the systems that we've created over hundreds of years in this country that have put people in this vulnerable position. So it's compounded for sure.
And how would you say all of this trauma, for any community for that matter, how would that translate into being resistant to letting go of your mask?
Yeah, in terms of being resistant, I think that one of the things that comes up is not really trusting what the information is and that everyone is acting in everyone else's best interest. So one of the things that we've been hearing a lot about with this new mask mandate that, that vaccinated people can be without a mask, but we don't really have a system for ensuring that that's true. So when you have, again, this history of not necessarily being able to trust what the news is or what the guidance is, then you may not think that other people are looking out for you the same way that you're looking out for them, and may want to continue to wear a mask for a while longer. And I think that's perfectly understandable and reasonable given the history that we have in this country.
What are some of the other reasons that people might want to keep wearing their mask?
Yeah, well, we have a lot of individual differences in terms of how tolerant we are of uncertainty and how much we engage in risk behavior. So before the pandemic, some people really like scary movies and roller coasters, and other people not so much. So people who are just wanting to be 100% sure, as close to 100% as you can be, are going to feel more comfortable wearing a mask, especially if it doesn't seem to hurt or negatively impact anyone else. It's sort of the reverse of the discussion that we were having at the beginning when the mask mandates were being pushed. Also, for some people, it can be a really effective coping behavior in terms of being out in public and not knowing necessarily what other people are thinking of you. And it can just give you a little bit more cover. And because we've developed this habit of, when we go outside, when we leave the house, we take our keys, we take our wallet, our phone, maybe more our phone than our wallet, and we grab our mask. So we just get in these habits, and it's hard to break them.
And I imagine, folks who are immunocompromised as well are probably still, very much attached to their masks for obvious reasons. What kind of stress or mixed feelings might people have in places where the virus is still rampant because of the trauma they've experienced?
Right. Yeah. I'm glad that you brought up people who are immunocompromised and then other people who aren't able to get the vaccine for whatever reason. So there's a lot of households where some of the family is vaccinated, some not, especially if you have younger children. So yes, in terms of wearing a mask, the mask has become the symbol for us that we are undergoing a pandemic. And in terms of messages that we may be getting, I think some of the feeling can be that if other people are doing something, such as, continuing to wear a mask, and that's a reminder to others that there is still a pandemic going on. And so if you're not wearing a mask, you may be resentful that someone is reminding you that life is not back to normal.
And something that everybody's going to eventually maybe have to get used to. Not there yet. Our thanks to Jocelyn Carter at DePaul University for joining us.